Good morning, everyone. Meeting is now underway. This is meeting 112 of the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 26, 2023, as well as the motion adopted on February 5, 2024. The committee is resuming consideration of its study on accessibility and affordability of wireless and broadband in Canada. I want to welcome our witnesses. We have from the CRTC, Scott Hutton, Chief of Consumer Research and Communications, Ian Bagley, Director General, Strategic Planning, Broadband Fund and Networks, and Anthony McIntyre, General Counsel and Deputy Executive Director, Legal Services. Thanks for being here in person in Ottawa. And we have from the Competition Bureau of Canada, Jean Pratt, the Senior Deputy Commissioner, Mergers and Monopolistic Practices, and Laura Sonley, Assistant Deputy Commissioner, Mergers Director, and one more witness from the Competition Bureau. You will have about 5 minutes, so I will start with the CRTC. Yes, Mr. Massé.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be brief. I do want to acknowledge, though, their upcoming meeting on Wednesday. The witnesses coming forth are not consistent with the motion that was passed calling for the CEOs of BCE Inc., Rogers Communications Inc., and TELUS Communications Inc., and it's also inconsistent with, we had Mr. Pallado here as well, who actually followed the proper procedure and rules for the motion that was passed. So this committee has a decision to make, in my opinion, very soon. I will have a draft motion to subpoena those CEOs ready, and look forward to either using maybe the end of my time at this meeting for that or in our committee business, because this is information that's been brought to us and it's inconsistent with what was passed here to the Industry Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. You're correct. So I understand I might keep some time for you towards the end of our meeting with witnesses today, and we can discuss how we go about getting the witnesses that this committee has asked for. So thank you, Mr. Massé, for bringing it up. I'll recognize you whenever you want it towards the end of the meeting. And remember, we have an hour and a half before we suspend, and we're going into committee business. Okay. Je céderai la parole au CRTC.
So the CRTC now has the floor. Please go ahead.
For inviting us to appear before your committee today. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Je suis accompagné aujourd'hui par...
I'm accompanied today by Ian Bagley, the Director General of Strategic Planning, and Anthony McIntyre, our General Counsel.
Independent quasi-judicial tribunal that operates at arm's length from government. We hold public hearings on telecommunications and broadcasting matters, and we make decisions based on the public record. In the telecommunications industry, our work focuses mainly on internet and cell phone services. We promote choice and affordability for Canadians, encourage investment in reliable, high-quality networks, and improve access to telecommunications services in Indigenous, rural, and remote communities. These goals were brought into greater focus in February 2023 when the government directed the CRTC to renew our approach to telecommunications policy. It asked us to, among other things, act quickly to provide clarity to the market, consider how our decisions would promote competition, affordability, consumer interest, and innovation. A
good example of how we have renewed our approach is in cell phone competition. In May of last year, the CRTC established rules that allow regional competitors to compete across Canada as mobile virtual network operators, using the networks of large cell phone companies. With this access, regional companies can expand their reach and offer Canadians more choice. Our work appears to be having a positive impact on the rates Canadians pay. The Consumer Price Index shows that cell phone service prices in Canada have declined overall 16% in the last year. Clearly, we need to continue our work, and we will be closely monitoring cell phone service prices to ensure that the recent price increase announced in January does not become a trend. At the same time, we are also working to enhance choice and affordability in Internet services. In March 2023, we launched a proceeding on the Internet services market to increase competition, create more choice, and lower prices.
Our data showed that competitors to the largest Internet service providers had been losing subscribers over the past 2 years. That's why last November, we released an initial decision to provide competitors with a workable way to sell Internet services using fiber-to-the-home networks of the large telephone companies. We took this initial step in Ontario and Quebec, where competition had declined most significantly. This work continued earlier this month when we held a public hearing on the issues. We continued to build our public record by hearing from service providers, competitors, consumer groups, individuals, and government agencies. Ultimately, we need to find a solution that allows consumers to benefit from greater choice while producing robust investment in networks. As we work to improve the affordability and quality of telecommunications services in Canada, we are also working to ensure everyone across our country has access to these services. Notre objectif est d'aider.
Our goal is to help connect all Canadians. The CRTC plays a small role as part of a larger government effort to bring affordable and high-quality telecommunications services to all Canadians. To support this effort, the CRTC helps fund projects in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities through its Broadband Fund.
We received more than 100 applications seeking $1.9 billion in funding. We're moving quickly to make decisions on these projects, while at the same time making our application process faster and easier. We're also looking at creating a new funding stream specifically for Indigenous communities. As you can see, we have been busy, and we don't expect to slow down anytime soon. We remain committed to promoting competition as a means of providing all Canadians with access to reliable, high-quality internet and cell phone services at affordable prices. We know that Canadians are not satisfied with the prices they pay, and more needs to be done. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'll now yield the floor to the Competition Bureau.
Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jean Pratt. I'm the Senior Deputy Commissioner of the Mergers and Monopolistic Practices Branch at the Competition Bureau. And joining me today are my colleagues Anthony DeRoche, who's the Deputy Commissioner of the Competition Promotion Branch, and Laura Sonley, who's Associate Deputy Commissioner in our Mergers Directorate. Le Bureau de la Concurrence est une organisation.
The Competition Bureau is an independent law enforcement agency that protects and promotes competition for the benefit of Canadian consumers and businesses. We do this because competition drives lower prices and innovation while fueling economic growth. We administer and enforce the Competition Act by investigating and taking action to address anti-competitive business practices that harm consumers, competition, and our economy. The Competition Act's merger provisions are the first line of defense against harms to competition. They are a preventative tool that guard against harmful concentration of market power.
The telecom sector has been and continues to be a priority for the Bureau. It's the backbone of commerce in the digital age and a critical service for businesses and consumers alike. This committee is well aware that the Bureau filed an application to the Competition Tribunal seeking to block the proposed merger between Rogers and Shaw. And while we were unsuccessful in our attempt, we stand by our decision to bring the case and our reasons for it. And we are continuing to monitor the market since the transaction closed. The Bureau will continue to prioritize our work in this sector through both our enforcement and advocacy roles. Just 2 weeks ago, Ms. Sonley participated with other Bureau personnel in the ongoing CRTC hearings on the review of the wholesale high-speed access service framework. Recent amendments to the Competition Act, notably made in 2022 and more recently through the Affordable Housing and Groceries Act, have given the Bureau more tools to protect and promote competition in Canada. The committee will also be aware that Bill C-59, currently before the House and being pre-studied in the Senate, contains several other amendments that, if passed, will further strengthen the Competition Act. We are committed to using the new tools wherever necessary to protect competition. And we also look forward to updating our guidance to Canadians and Canadian businesses on how the Bureau will enforce these amendments. Le Bureau croit fermement.
The Bureau strongly believes that competition can play a greater role in the concentrated telecom sector, with Canadian consumers, businesses, and the overall economy reaping the benefits. More competition unlocks innovation and productivity and helps us to maintain a high standard of living. We share the committee's interest in enhancing competition and working to ensure that high-quality telecommunications services are reliable and affordable for all Canadians.
I would note that the law requires the Bureau to conduct its investigations in private and keep confidential the information we have. This obligation may prevent us from discussing certain facets of our investigation. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to appear today, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And to start the discussion, I'll turn it over to MP Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. This is probably one of the most important studies that this committee is undertaking right now, because Canadians pay the highest cell phone bills in the whole planet, not just in North America, not in part of the world, it's the whole world. Only South Africa seems to have some of the higher fees. And the reason for that is we have basically a de facto network duopoly in Canada. We have only 2 independent mobile networks in Canada with a national footprint. So we have Rogers, which does cost sharing, of course, or sharing with now with Videotron, and then we have Bell and Telus who operate in the east side. But we only have 2 of this whole country. So it's easy to see what's happened over the years, that when you have less players and less sellers, many buyers, that the prices have gone up. And just to talk about some of the recent data we have, we know we talked about from Stats Canada, but from Rewill from 2023 data, Canada is paying a minimum monthly price for 4G and 5G smartphone plans with at least 100 gigabytes, 1,000 minutes, and 10 megabytes per second peak speed. Canadians are paying $90 per plan, versus the United States, who are paying $44, and Australians who are paying less than $30. So this is what happens when we've had this major oligopoly control the country. We had the Prime Minister say he was going to reduce cell phone fees by 25%. This is in 2019. Based on these numbers, that didn't happen. We had the Industry Minister who said that a 4th national player would be able to reduce these fees across Canada, and that was supposed to be Freedom and Videotron. And right now we're seeing, with prices going up $9 a month, that's not happening. So the CRTC, you've been given directives. I want to talk specifically about the directives that you've been given from the government. And I want to go specific this morning to MVNOs. Right now, how many MVNOs do we have in Canada operating at this moment?
I believe they're working towards having 3 potential MVNOs operating at this point in time.
Okay, and are you aware of how many MVNOs are in the U.S. and how many are in Australia?
I do not have that data.
So the number is 139 in the U.S. and 66 in Australia. We look at what a lot of Canadians aren't aware of what are flanker brands, but are actually part of the big 3. So Bell owns Bell, MTS, Lucky Mobile, and Virgin Plus. Rogers owns Fido, Chatter, CityPhone. Telus owns Koodo, and Public Mobile. So when customers think they have choice, they're actually operated by the big brands. And to your answer, we only have 3 MVNOs. But you've said you've been given a direction by the minister to create more MVNOs in Canada. But what are the stipulations right now if you want to open a MVNO? Do you have to have network, and do you have to have certain years to build it up? What is the stipulations on owning an MVNO in Canada right now?
The model that we have implemented to actually impose the MVNO regime is one based on trusting the regional players across the nation, which are various players who have access to spectrum and who are building out networks to essentially better serve Canadians and provide them with more competition and better prices.
And does that follow the same model we might see in Australia or the U.S.?
The U.S. model is, I believe, is not a mandated model. It's a model that is developed as a result of, effective competition in that market.
And I think the same is in Australia. So essentially, if someone wants to start an MVNO in Canada, the barrier to entry is billions of dollars, not millions, to build out a network and then build that network out to offer. And that's the only way you can become an MVNO. Is that correct?
We have trusted and we have mandated MVNO regime to the major incumbent players that you've mentioned through a regime where we have certainly with recommendations and full public hearings looked at the model and ensured that that was the best ability for us to build out and maintain not just good prices, but maintain innovation, more choice through more competition on that front. Those players are entering the market, have entered the market, and have already had an impact on pricing. I know you've highlighted certain pricing indications, but certainly our numbers with respect to mobile is over the last year, you've seen an actual decrease by 16% of the overall rates on the packages in there. And in fact, prices have been decreasing since 2017 in that measure there. Canadians do not feel like they are getting better prices because at the same time they are consuming more and more faster services and significantly more data consumption services.
So I'm going to get you right there. That's what Canadians are consuming. Do you have updated numbers at CRTC today of how much data Canadians are consuming per month at this point?
I would have it here, but we can provide it to the committee.
If you can submit that.
Yeah.
Your last data from your submissions, 2014 in one quarter, Canadians would consume 39 million gigabytes a quarter. And quarter three, 2022, that went up to 554 million gigabytes. So Canadians were consuming over 10 times the data they were in 2015. That's only in 8 years. So when we're looking at prices, we can go into how Canadians are looking at that. But the reality is companies now are selling more data. They're gouging Canadians on data, and they're making more money on that data. Would that be correct?
Well, actually, when you look at the numbers and the level of data consumed, certainly Canadians are looking for faster speeds because the speed is certainly an implication as we are consuming more data, consuming more video, consuming more high bandwidth services as Canadians on that front. But the actual rate, when you look at the rate per what is consumed on an average basis, that rate has been decreasing tremendously on that front. Canadians are consuming far more. As we're here today, we're continue to work on expanding the MVNO regime to make sure that we're able to serve Canadians and that there is more competition and that there is even more price impact on, whether it's data consumption services or your mobile subscription packages.
Merci, Monsieur Williams. Madame Lapointe, la parole est à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Lapointe.
This month, it's my understanding that the CRTC held public hearings to address the fact that increasing wireless competition has not been effective. Why have current measures, in your opinion, been unsuccessful in increasing competition?
Just to be specific, our hearings earlier this week, or that concluded just Friday before last, was on what I'd call home internet services. It's your wireline services to the home. That market certainly, contrary to what I've indicated with respect to cellular prices that have been significantly decreasing consistently since 2017, that market certainly has stagnated. Now, the world has changed in part as we're all working from home, consuming far more internet services at home, bigger speeds, more data. That particular market is the one that we looked at last week. And what we've been seeing with that environment is that the regime put in place for competition was in need of great update. We've been seeing that a number of players were exiting the market. They were having more and more difficulties consuming, being able to serve consumers. They're losing subscribers. And what we did there is we certainly took action on that front. We've implemented, not only have we conducted the proceeding, held the hearing to hear from over 300 different groups to talk about the issue there, but we took immediate action to lower the rates that the competitors could use by 10%. We also took action to mandate that access to fiber services by those competitors so that they can continue to expand their services and serve Canadians and bring more competition.
Okay, thank you. In 2016, the CRTC created a $750 million fund using contributions from large telecommunications service providers to support projects in areas where broadband targets had not yet been met. From August 2022, the Broadband Fund committed $226.5 million for improving fixed and mobile wireless broadband internet services. Can you offer some insights as to why the $750 million fund has not been utilized, especially where it pertains to First Nation communities where we know that there is a significant digital divide there?
You're correct, right? The areas that are certainly need close attention and where the CRTC is paying close attention are Indigenous communities, rural communities, and northern communities also. We've certainly been looking at a variety of approaches to be able to help and serve that variety of customers on that front. The $750 million is essentially, it's a calculation of $150 million a year over a number of different years. So we certainly, as we're looking at that funding, have been committing the funds that we have been collecting and redistributing them on that front. And right now, we're on our third call process, which we made easier and faster than everyone before that, and where we're also looking more particularly at creating, for example, an Indigenous stream and paying close attention to northern communities. We are currently subject, we have about 100 applications and $1.9 billion in funding requests. So $750 million will certainly, help in that domain. Our approach certainly is only a small portion in overall government funding. We're about 2% of the overall funding that has been made available to broadband expansion.
So what are the barriers to expanding the broadband connectivity to remote communities? What do you think the most significant barriers are?
I'll probably ask Mr. Bagley, because that's his field of expertise, to intervene on that front. But certainly there's, northern and rural communities. Northern communities are particularly difficult on that side. Everything from Nunavut, whose satellites served only by satellite. Certain, northern construction periods are short. There's a whole bunch of different things that are low population density levels, huge distances. But Mr. Bagley can probably add some precision to that.
I think you've captured that well, Mr. Hutton, and exactly that. The lack of access to general infrastructure like roads is a big barrier to building out infrastructure. But, for example, in December, we were successful in awarding funding for Nunavut to provide high-speed internet for the first time to all 25 communities via Starlink satellite backhaul. So we are making progress in that regard, but certainly geography and remoteness is the key factor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Lapointe. Monsieur Gar-
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Mr. Gallon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. My first question is for the CRTC witnesses. There have been announcements about prices at the beginning of the year, and that's really certainly caught our attention. We heard from various people that Canadians are paying much more than other people around the world when we compare with the G7 and Australia. But when we invite the CEOs of these companies, and they don't seem to be much in a hurry to come and tell us exactly why these price increases are needed. So why do you think they're not in a hurry to talk to us? Well, we're in the same boat. They give us the same explanation. Of course, it's difficult to compare prices and services exactly between one country and another. It's very difficult work to do. We're continuing our work on that, though, because we're certainly of the opinion that Canadians pay too much for their services. And when we look at the international scene, prices for wireless have come down in Canada. We're not the highest. We're third when it comes to price. But when it comes to cabled, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when we look at competitive jurisdictions where we compare prices, is it typically Canadian in Canada that we're seeing these prices come down? No, it's happening around the world. The prices are going down for a given product. For home internet prices, we are seeing the prices going down a little bit, but we are still the most expensive in the world. So it's true that Canadians are paying a great deal for these services. Yes, we feel that that is the case. We are working with telecoms and home internet suppliers, providers to increase competition and bring down prices. This will help with innovation, the choice of services. So that's a good answer, and perhaps that clarifies things. So now I will turn to the Competition Bureau. It's not your fault, but we have a pretty specific competition situation in Canada, around the world. If we find that there are problems with competition, then competitors or consumers are the ones to pay the price. Now, when it comes to C56, if that was already in place, would that have a good effect? I will answer your question in English because I don't have that technical vocabulary in French.
The efficiencies exception was certainly a factor before the tribunal. Ultimately, the tribunal's decision did not turn on the efficiencies exception. We are, I think, very publicly welcoming of the repeal of the efficiencies exception. We do find that it tends to have the law focus on efficiencies more than on the actual competitive effects of a transaction. And we're very happy that we're in a new world order.
Je vous repose la question directement.
I want to ask you the question very directly. I think it's very important because when it comes to, say, RBC buying HSBC, I think that under C56 that would not have been able to go ahead. We know that we didn't hear a lot of objection to it, and it did go ahead. So do you believe that if C56 were in place, were in effect, that Rogers would have been able to buy Shaw the way it did?
C'est difficile d'anticiper l'impact parce que nous avons mené une enquête et le litige a été annulé analysant vers du cadre actuel. Ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que si on examine C56 avec le gain d'efficience, tout en examinant les propositions du projet de loi C59, je pense qu'il y aurait une différence. Surtout avec C59, où les niveaux de concentration constitueront désormais un facteur que peut examiner le tribunal, par exemple avec Roger Shaw. On aurait vu que les 4 grandes entreprises auraient détenu une part de marché de 95% ensemble. Donc, l'abrogation d'une disposition qui dit que le tribunal ne peut pas examiner la concentration, en plus des autres facteurs qui disent que le tribunal peut l'examiner, en plus des effets conjugués, ça constitue un effet. Bien, ça, selon moi, ça aurait changé certaines des analyses sur Shaw Rogers.
Que les conditions qui ont été
Very quickly, the conditions that were imposed by the minister were inadequate to ensure enough competition to help consumers. Is that correct?
decision. What I can speak to is how we looked at the transaction under the Competition Act. We definitely had concerns about the transaction. That's why we challenged it before the tribunal. We did file an application. The Videotron divestiture was brought forward after we filed that application. We did not think that divestiture went far enough to address what we thought the anti-competitive effects would be from that transaction. So we continued, mostly because we were concerned about the divestiture did not address the particularly vigorous and effective competitor we saw with Shaw Mobile, and they were able to leverage their wireline infrastructure to be able to offer bundled product. Videotron, with the divestiture of Freedom, does not have that infrastructure. And so that did concern us, and that is why we continued our fight.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Massé.
Thank you very much. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses. My first question is to the Competition Bureau. With the opposition to the Roger Shaw decision, it had a consequence, I believe, of $9 million that was recouped by Rogers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So this is outrageous, in my opinion, and defeats the purpose of having, in many respects, a competition bureau that's able to really stand up for itself and for Canadian consumers. And aside from that, though, is this $9 million, is this now a budgetary loss in the Competition Bureau's operations that has to be made up for, or is it just, or will it be made up for by the government at this time? I've requested that money be made up for by the minister.
Well, I can tell you it has not impacted our operations. We have been able to get coverage for that cost award such that merger review is not being impacted.
Okay. Well, it's still $9 million out of your budget, so I'm sorry. It's hard to believe that it wouldn't have any. I mean, Rogers didn't have to use it on Shohei Ohtani because that didn't work out either. But there's no doubt that, in my mind, that it also sends a chilling factor. And quite frankly, does this, has there been discussion amongst the Competition Bureau about what to do if this case situation rises again?
Well, what I can say is we are very welcoming of the proposed amendments in Bill C-59, which would immunize the commissioner from cost awards to the extent that we are bringing a case in the public interest. So, that I think goes a long way to addressing any potential chilling impact that the cost awards could have on us bringing cases before the tribunal.
Thank you. And I appreciate that because it's very important for public confidence to be maintained. And our competition legislation has handcuffed, quite frankly, the Competition Bureau in several ways, in my opinion. One of the things I do want to know is that has there been consideration amongst the Competition Bureau, because you've seen what's taken place is exactly what was predicted by yourselves with regards to prices going up from Rogers. But have you looked at market structure and establishing some type of a study or an investigation of other countries and looking at whether separating the wholesale facilities from the retail sales service market might be beneficial for Canada with regards to the telecom communications industries?
So what I could say is we don't have any ongoing investigations. What we do have, because this is a sector that is incredibly concentrated and is a focus of our work across the provisions of the Act, is that we are proactively monitoring what's going on. And what we have seen from what I can tell you from publicly available sources is that, we do see some concerns that are starting to, or at least have continued post-closing. In particular, Rogers has now discontinued Shaw Mobile. As I mentioned, we found Shaw Mobile to be a particularly growing and disruptive competitive force in British Columbia and Alberta. And they offered very aggressive pricing for bundled wireless plans. So far, we haven't seen any information that would suggest that Rogers is offering comparable pricing to Shaw Mobile post-transaction. So that is of a concern. Videotron also indicated during the tribunal proceeding that it would begin offering bundled services at low prices after acquiring Freedom Mobile. To date, we're not aware of any bundled offering being offered by Videotron and Freedom. Additionally, the planned expansion of Freedom's wireless network appears to have been affected by its acquisition by Videotron. We thought we had concerns that Videotron would be less likely to invest in Freedom's network, given its smaller base of subscribers and lack of wireline assets. And to date, it appears, again, that Videotron has not expanded its network infrastructure as previously planned. Pricing post-transaction is a much more complex issue, and I would defer to my colleague Laura Sonley to just explain some of the factors that go into monitoring that from publicly available sources.
Yeah, I think one thing we would caution against is looking at a single metric when considering prices. So there's been a lot of discussion of CPI. I think generally when we look at pricing, we try to have as many metrics as possible. And if you do see a discrepancy between two metrics, we question why that's the case. And currently we are seeing a difference between the trend in CPI versus average revenue per user. So that's just one consideration.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chair, do I have any more time?
You do?
Okay, thank you. Move to the CRTC. Has there been any consideration from the CRTC of reestablishing mandatory capital expenditures as part of the issuancing of spectrum licenses and so forth? There in the past has been that process, and what we've seen with some of the spectrum licenses has also been a musical chair approach in terms of trading them back and forth or not even being used at times. Has there been any consideration of going through a process like that?
With respect to spectrum licensing, the spectrum regulator is, in fact, I said the Minister of Industry on that front. So we are not involved in the issuance of spectrum licensing or being able to impose conditions with respect to those licenses going forward. We have been working through different means to ensure that we have greater competition, everything from looking at attachments to poles and towers to facilitate network deployment. We have also been, as mentioned earlier, implemented the MVNO regime here in Canada and have been quite active in ensuring that the players that are involved are being able to reach deals and are being able to operate in this field and offer more competition, choice, and reliable services to Canadians.
I appreciate that answer, and I think, though, I do want to ask, though, to follow up, is that the CRTC could actually offer an opinion or a voice on this. And seems that, like, later on you have to deal with a structural problem that the minister is not, and I said is not actually put in place. And so has there been consideration of the CRTC becoming more involved in actually looking at spectrum licensing conditions and processes?
Well, the CRTC certainly has a number of wide powers at its disposal granted to it pursuant to the Telecommunications Act. Spectrum is not one of them. We, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have currently a significant number of issues on our plate where we are working within and in priority on the items that are certainly squarely within our purview. And also, you know, as an independent quasi-judicial tribunal, it's not our place to be suggesting to the policymakers, you know, the policy to be made on that front.
No, and I can appreciate that offer, that answer. The issue, though, is that we have the minister setting the rules and conditions and terms, and then the CRTC later on trying to deal with it that are disconnected entirely, but also create structural problems for what's taking place. One last question to the CRTC. Do you have enough resources with regards to the changing role of the CRTC? And has there been any thought about if there are additional resources required, what would they be to speed up CRTC decisions? That's something that we do often get as complaints and concerns. That is one thing that I think that is fair that sometimes the industry does bring back. Has there been any thought about that situation and almost presenting a cost for better practices, or I mean not better practices, but quicker practices from the CRTC if we did want to accomplish that goal?
Well, in actual fact, in respect, I mentioned in my remarks the introduction of the telecom policy direction. In that same context, the CRTC has also, in fact, secured additional resources to help in its telecom operations. And it has been operating much quicker. We have gotten out of the gate rather quickly with a number of public notices to intervene in this market. We have resolved issues with respect to arbitration in accessing the MVNO networks rather quickly. We have already made a couple of decisions with respect to implementing our regime to provide expanded access to competitors to the ILEX networks. I mentioned the fiber deployment on that front. We simply concluded a hearing earlier this month on that approach, and we're continuing to work tirelessly in that domain.
Okay, and I guess not so fair.
Mr. Massey, I'm afraid that I should have specified how much more time you had. We're way over, but I'll turn it over now to Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Massey. Ms. Pratt, if I could start with you, just for all of those perhaps that are watching that didn't follow as closely as most of us in the room did about the Shaw-Rogers Freedom Videotron drama and reduced competition that resulted. You advised the government early on in that process about the Competition Bureau's views on the competitive nature of that proposed transaction. Is that correct?
So we're an independent law enforcement agency. So our role is really like we're like the competition cops. So we investigate a merger. We are completely independent in that function.
You're right, and you said?
Well, we were definitely concerned, and that's why we challenged the transaction before the Competition Tribunal. That's the way our model works. We investigate, we see a problem, the commissioner brings an application before the tribunal, and we have to live with that decision.
And Mr. Pellado was here recently, as you probably may have seen, and he was quite effusive about himself and what he may do for competition, following up on the positioning that the government had at the time. But 4 weeks after the transaction closed, even after he appeared before this committee in January 2023, he increased prices of Freedom, $7 on the BYOB, bring your own device package of Freedom. Will Inc. was just barely drawing on the acquisition, even though the condition of that was reduced prices. And of course, the condition of everything, as we know, was that Rogers committed and everyone committed that they'd reduce prices. And of course, Rogers has increased prices again. We'll find out what the others plan to do when they come before here. Is that reduced competition that you warned about why these prices are going up?
So I don't think we can say that whether or not prices are going up and what the magnitude of that is. As Ms. Sonley said, it is a very complex question that requires a lot of data to see because of the variety of factors and what actual consumers are paying. So that is a very difficult question to answer definitively at this point. What I can say is we were definitely concerned about the acquisition and the replacement of Shaw Mobile, who had been a vigorous and effective competitor, who seemed to be driving prices and bundled products down in Western Canada. And frankly, the evidence showed that Rogers was the biggest loser in that fight.
So I get that, but the only price announcements I've seen are ones that have gone up. And you mentioned some disturbing things that the Competition Bureau is watching with regard to the fact that Freedom doesn't seem to be rolling out their network. And our concerns, of course, were that the history of Quebecor and Videotron were actually arbitraging spectrum, buying it from the government and then selling it at considerable profit. So our skepticism's still there about whether or not they will actually be a fourth or third national carrier. So I'm wondering if you could explain a little more, because one of the things I think that you raised a concern on in that merger was that Rogers Shaw, you mentioned that part of it, and BC in particular, would go over 40%, I believe it was, market share in British Columbia, yet the tribunal said, well, that's no big deal. I think anytime any large oligopoly has 40% market share or more, it's a big deal. And now you're saying they're not even offering that price that was there, that was part of the bundling. So has that resulted in people, in particular in British Columbia, seeing that pricing going up?
I can't say definitively where prices are because it is a complex question. What I can say is we are concerned about the trajectory. We didn't have a problem with Videotron as the buyer of Freedom. Videotron has demonstrated that it can be a vigorous and effective competitor in the province of Quebec, but the distinguishing feature there is they own their wireline infrastructure. They are able to offer bundled product, which I believe their CEO mentioned as a strength there. They cannot do that in Alberta and British Columbia because they don't have the wireline assets to do that. They committed to do that using various behavioral agreements with Rogers, and we just haven't seen that come to the market.
So one of the things that comes in, and Mr. Hutton, I could ask you this. You mentioned that there are 3 MVNOs that are in the application process. Are any of those 3 not owned by the big guys?
Well, they're essentially the 3, as far as I'm aware, certainly is Québécois is the most active on that front. Who's made deals with both Rogers and
right.
And
how long have they been
front.
negotiating with Rogers and the CRTC right now to get access to an MVNO policy that the CRTC has? I'm told it's been 2 years now.
Well, we essentially set the terms and conditions for that regime, I believe, last May or April. And as early as late June, we arbitrated the first deal between Rogers and Videotron.
And that's going to court?
And again, we've arbitrated an additional deal with respect to Bell and Québécois at that point in time.
And those are going to court?
There is a legislative framework and laws in this country. So yes, our role essentially is to make sure that we act quickly and we have robust decisions that are put in place.
The big 2 that Mr. MP Williams mentioned that basically control the 2 networks are using the legal system, it appears to me, to prevent year after year after year MVNOs from entering this market and dragging it out, because every year of profitability without an MVNO is good for their shareholders, not so good for consumers. So they're actively, appears to me, to be using the system that the government, the CRTC, and now the courts have to delay at least, if not totally prevent, competition through MVNOs. So is your policy really effective since they're allowed to use it that way?
Quite frankly, there is a legislative framework and there is the legal framework that the companies are, using that is at their disposal on that front. What we've been doing is we put the regime in place. We've acted quickly. We've acted robustly to make sure everything that we can do is put in place. That's, sort of the limits of our ability at that point in front. Contrary to, what was highlighted, prices have been declining in that market.
I didn't ask about that. Can I, one last one? No, well, we've been through this already. The number 1, number 2, and number 3 in the world still. The rest of the world's prices are going down faster than Canada's. But the issue going forward, we were also told by Mr. Pelado and by others that the roaming fees haven't changed that the CRTC sets in, I think, something like 5 years, and are now 6 times higher than other countries. Why has the government not reduced roaming fees?
We are currently actively studying and looking at the costing of those roaming fees. The roaming fees in question that we're looking at there is the inter-carrier roaming fees for domestic roaming. So when Videotron doesn't have a network in a certain area, they would be using the roaming fees to roam on Bell or Rogers or TELUS's network, depending on where that is. Those are the roaming fees we are looking at. They are something that's determined based on cost. We are actively and currently studying those costs to look at establishing rates going forward.
So when would those new rates, do you think, become public? Presumably substantially reduced from the $12, $13, $14 they are now to the 2 or 3 we see in other countries.
I can't presume, as we're conducting proceedings and hearings on that front, I can't forecast or presume an outcome at this point in time, given our nature as a tribunal.
Thank you very much. MP Sorbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the committee, to the witnesses. To Ms. Pratt from the Competition Bureau. The teeth of the Competition Bureau, if I can use that analogy, I believe with C-34, what's in C-59 currently, long overdue, probably 2 decades overdue in terms of the changing competitive environment that we operate in, and also due to the nature of a number of industrial sectors in Canada where concentration is an issue. You can chalk it up to geography, capital requirements, investment, and so forth. But I wanted to ask and get on the record how important were the changes to the Competition Act in C34 and now in C59 from your point of view in looking at combinations or mergers or acquisitions or inverse deals or whatever term you want to use.
Well, maybe I'll start and talk from the mergers perspective, and I'm going to defer to my colleague to talk about the larger Act's changes. We are incredibly welcoming of the changes in Bill C-56 and Bill C-59. I do think that it's the first significant changes to our Act since 1986 for the merger provisions. That is transformative. The repeal of the efficiencies exception, as well as the addition of being able to consider concentration under the merger provisions is very different than a world where the tribunal explicitly could not. And adding that as a factor. It is also very helpful when we're talking about sectors like telecommunications, which tend to have fairly stable oligopolistic market structures, that we have an explicit provision to deal with tacit and explicit coordination in Section 93, the merger provisions as well. So I think we're very welcoming of all of those changes to the merger provisions. And Mr. Durocher can speak to the larger view of the other changes in the Act.
Yeah, I think Bill C-56 and what's proposed in C-59, very important changes, very much welcome. Many of the changes are, in fact, entirely in line with recommendations that the Competition Bureau had made to government in the context of consultation. I would flag that if we look at the merger regime in particular, and merger is the first line of defense in protecting competition in the economy, there are a couple of other areas where we believe this can be strengthened. One relates to the adoption of structural presumptions in the merger review process, and the other relates to the remedial standard when there is harm to competition, what needs to be fixed. So these are issues that we will continue to advocate for, but by and large, C-56 and C-59 have been very significant to move Canada forward and have a robust competition regime.
And if I can just follow up, in terms of the guardrails, so we look at the Shaw-Rogers deal and the Videotron take off on assets, take away with assets if that happened. The guardrails in place if certain things, a certain bar isn't met or certain promises are met. What are the guardrails in place right now, or ex post versus in C-56 and C-59?
So maybe I'll speak to the tribunal did not make any order. So any of the representations that were made by representatives and witness, there's no order to hold them to those representations. What I can say is, like, structural presumptions in particular may have changed the way that case was heard, because the way a structural presumption works is we would have demonstrated that the merger was concentrative, and the burden would have shifted to the parties to demonstrate that the merger is not anti-competitive, instead of for us to continue to prove that it is anti-competitive.
Almost like a reverse onus.
A reverse onus, yes. Which still leaves the door open that if they can demonstrate that it is pro-competitive, then that would still be there. The other addition of the remedy standards. So here, we advocated that the remedy of the divestiture of freedom did not go far enough. The restore standard, which we have advocated for in our competition submission, would ensure that all of the anti-competitive effects would have to be remedied, not just the part that takes it from a substantial lessening of competition to a lessening of competition. So we think that would have also helped.
Okay. And to the CRTC, I believe there was a policy framework that was put in place. If you could comment, gentlemen, with regards to how the CRTC is doing in terms of implementing that policy framework, and a follow-on question: the MVNO standalone sort of operator seems very popular in Europe, from my understanding. What can we do further to facilitate MVNOs here in Canada, please?
Well, with respect to the policy directive, certainly there are a number of different points that were highlighted in that front, primarily with respect to ensuring that Canadians continue and that we see, continued access to reliable, affordable, high-quality networks. Various areas were highlighted, certainly the MVNO regime, and paying close attention to the MVNO regime, ensuring that all of the components, whether it's roaming, whether it's access to the networks, are functioning properly. So certainly the Commission has been acting quickly and with aplomb to make sure that that component is going forward. We're also looking quite, there was highlights with respect to what we call the regime that gives access to home internet wires to competitors. So we've, certainly had a hearing last week.
As we'd call it?
The last mile. Well, often it's much longer than a mile, and that's a challenge in our country. But it's essentially that last mile that we're certainly looking at expanding. We've already expanded to fiber-based services. We've adjusted the rates downwards. We held a hearing last week or a couple weeks ago on that very subject matter. So clearly we're working hard on that front. There's a couple other elements with respect to consumer, on the consumer front, make sure Canadians are getting what they pay for through measurement of the broadband services, making it easier and even more accessible for Canadians to work towards choosing competitors and benefiting from, the competitive approach, everything from making it easy to switch to information
Mr. Hutton,
matters.
I thank you for that. I think I'd love to elaborate at a different point in time, but I think my time is over. So back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Garon.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hutton, you mentioned earlier that you had a great deal of work at the CRTC. You were in over your head even. Over the past few weeks, Bell laid off 4,800 employees, mainly in broadcasting, and one of the reasons they gave was how slow the rollout was of the provisions under C11. So do you have the resources that you need? Yes, and we got additional resources to implement C11 as well as other legislation. There's a great deal of work underway, and so we are putting all of our efforts into implementing C11. That started in April. It came into force, and I think we put all of our efforts. So are things moving ahead as quickly as you would like? Yes, they are. We had an assessment at the end of the year, and we have already implemented 3 major decisions. Well, if I may, this is very important for Quebecers when we talk about Canadian and local content and the resources. I would like you, if you would, give us an idea of what is coming up, what we can expect, because that announcement of almost 5,000 people being laid off, I would like to know what we can expect. Well, what we have already in our planning process is the 7 very specific decisions on pricing and hearings. For example, we had a hearing that ended in late 2023, and we are focusing on fair conditions for new entrants into the market. We want to make sure. Well, what about the timing of that? Well, we're working on that. We will have a first decision that will have 2 aspects to it. First of all, the contribution fund and the policy regarding the type of contribution that has to be provided. And then we will work with all the players to make sure that this is a fair marketplace. Are there hearings coming up? Yes, there are in the months coming up. We're just working on the definition of Canadian content. We're having active meetings with all players in the industry to explore this, to make sure that the money that we're putting into this is going in the right direction. Mr. Massey, please now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to the CRTC and community involvement, I just wonder if there's been an attempt to, or if there would be a more public education about the CRTC and intervening and providing submissions. I know that the civil society groups are very much astute at this, but at the same time, I'm not sure ordinary citizens are as engaged because they don't really fully comprehend the CRTC. I'm just wondering if there's been any public education or outreach done to encourage regular residents to be able to make submissions to CRTC.
We have certainly, taken note and heed of the fact that the CRTC being in part a tribunal and, holding hearings, having a number of written proceedings. As you mentioned, civil society groups have been participating through the years. We've also been working on funding for those particular groups there. But we've also started to change our ways with respect to how we consult with Canadians to actually go out and reach, various groups that haven't been contributing to our hearings. We recently were working on launching an Indigenous relations group to ensure that, for example, we do engage with decision makers and Indigenous populations throughout the country. We're planning the same things with other groups. We have changed the way we're holding hearings. For example, I just mentioned our study of the definition of Canadian content. We're actually going out to 5 different regions of the countries, inviting a number of different groups that haven't been to the CRTC before and actively working them in workshops and work groups to be able to gather their opinions, work those into our public hearings, work them into our public decisions at the end of the day to make sure that we actually serving them.
Would this include multicultural groups and organizations? Because I think that's one of the things that we're kind of missing a little bit in terms of what I've seen. Does that include multi-languages and so forth that the CRTC will be publishing its material or encouraging outreach in those facets?
Most definitely. Those are the groups, whether it's Indigenous, whether it's diverse groups representing multilingual communities. On that front, whether it's new immigrant groups, how can they contribute to our system? Essentially, we are reaching out on all different fronts.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Généreux.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses. My questions will be particularly for the CRTC. I want to read a short excerpt from a letter that a mayor of a small community in my area, in the Saint-Modeste, received concerning the deployment program of Bell Canada. So I won't read it all, but a decision was made, unfortunately, by the federal regulator, the CRTC, to reduce the increase of the network significantly, and the CRTC decision was made on November 6, 2023. So what should I say to the mayor for Saint-Modeste? Bell Canada made this submission, and you had decided to allow the providers to sell spectrum. Others didn't agree. And Bell decided, therefore, to reduce its investment. So what should I say to the mayor? The CRTC is continuing to work hard to make sure that Canadians receive high-quality, affordable phone services, and that broadband is increasingly deployed across the country. When we look at our work and our hearings, this has been the topic just a few weeks ago, that was access to fiber optic service to make sure that all Canadians can have affordable access to high quality services, and investment is extremely important. That's our job. That is the topic of our hearing, the one we just held a few weeks ago. So what you can say to the mayor is that the CRTC does understand very well what the problem is, and we're looking for the right balance between affordable prices so that everybody can have access and the investments needed. Well, I've been here for years, and when we look back at 2008, 2009, 14 years, and we've had a huge amount of investment in Canada. I think we have done a lot to increase access to these services, but when I look at the documents I have, I see that we only have a 64% access. Now, we know that we've had a lot of back and forth. You've been taken to court for some of your decisions and so on. When I look at my riding and others, we know that there is a lot of physical geography to deal with, but there are continual complaints about the service. We don't have fiber optics deployed everywhere. In some towns we do, but we don't in some of the villages and elsewhere. So despite all of the investment by the federal government and the provincial government over the past 15 years, how come we don't have full coverage in my rural region? In Quebec, given the combined investment up to now and between the government and industry, we are certainly working toward 100% coverage. Well, when can I say to people in my riding that this will happen? Is it 2035, 2045? Because I was a mayor, and we were told even then that by 2020, 2025, we'd be there. So it gets delayed, postponed. So given the investments that we've made, we should be at 100% in Canada. And in Quebec, a lot has been done. The province felt that the federal government wasn't moving fast enough, so it provided investments. It costs $85,000 to bring fiber optics from 1.5 kilometers to someone's place. So I don't understand still why today we are in this situation. Explain that to me. Well, it's a huge task. We have a very large country. We have many small communities to serve. Obviously, you're right, the goal is 100% by 2030. And given the projections that we have in working with industry, which meets with us office, in Quebec, 100% is very close. There are certain specific areas that we have to look at. But how can you predict that? Yes, we have funding for that, for broadband. It's 2% of the billions of dollars that will be invested. $1.9 billion in submissions is before us already. And we are working very hard to make sure that all Canadians have access to broadband. I have another question. It'll have to be very quick. Mr. Pelado came last week or 2 weeks ago, and he said he was the best in show, and the others weren't worth very much. He doesn't have the same infrastructure in the West, of course, but he has just offered a price of, I think, $50 for 100 gigabytes. How come that can't be done in the West as well? Is it because there's a lack of infrastructure? I think that is a factor. There is the funding.
Have what they have in Quebec to be able to compete as vigorously as they do in Quebec, because they don't own the infrastructure.
Merci.
And they have to rely on a competitor for it.
Thank you very much, MP Turnbull. The floor is yours.
Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. Really great conversation. I'm learning a lot from you. Let me just start with Mr. Hutton. So you had said wireless prices are coming down. I just want to verify that. I know that some members on this committee don't like to hear that, but that's basically what Stats Canada has said. Mr. Hutton, could you just confirm that for us?
Prices have been coming down. They came down, using the CPI for comparative packages by 16% over the last year. They've been coming down since 2017 on that front. Our position internationally has been marginally improving, but Canadians certainly are feeling that they are constantly paying higher prices. We're fully aware of that, and we're fully committed to addressing that concern.
So, and I grant that Canadians do not feel that the prices are coming down. So even though statistically we know it's true that Canadians aren't, it's not landing for Canadians in the way that we need it to, they need to feel it, right? So one of the things that our government did was to reduce switching costs by allowing someone to break their contract with a $50 fee. Do you think this is a helpful tool because my understanding is if you are locked into a contract and prices have come down and companies are lowering their prices for different packages, that you're not actually able to take advantage of that unless you actually switch, unless you actually break your contract and renegotiate with another supplier. Ms. Pratt, would you like to maybe speak to whether this is an opportunity for consumer education?
Well, I think as an organization, we actually want all consumers to see what benefit switching can give to them. We've had promotions where we actually promote that, Switch Week, because we have seen in particular sectors, including telecommunications, that being your own champion and seeing what deal you can get from other providers is a way that can benefit your own bottom line. And I think that continues to be something we encourage consumers to do.
Great, thank you. And I know that the Competition Bureau provided a submission to the CRTC on mobile wireless services. I guess that was fairly recently.
Yes, it was.
And in that submission, I believe there was several recommendations, but also several findings. So in particular, I wanted to highlight where the big three providers of wireless services face a disruptor. Prices dropped significantly. Is that true, Mrs. Pratt?
That has been our finding, and that's been our observation. In addition to this one, also an intervention that we did several years ago, that where we have a strong fourth player, prices in those regions tend to be lower.
And by how much do those prices drop?
I'm not sure, Ms. Sonley, do you have a
I think
range?
it varied based on the degree of market share they were able to obtain. I can't remember the exact numbers. I think it's between somewhere
35
around
and 40%
exactly
is what I
it,
remember. And so is that consistent with what your data has shown?
Yeah, in the study in 2019, yes.
Okay, great. And Freedom Mobile would be an example of a disruption in the market. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And what market share must be achieved to disrupt the market? Like what percentage of market share?
I
roughly?
think I'll defer to Ms. Onley or Mr. DeRoche as to whether or not we've actually measured that. I mean, I think my recollection is that, you want to be going towards a 10% market share to really be seeing that disruption.
I believe 5.5% market share was the threshold where we observed these strong price effects, and the more the disruptor gets up above 5.5% market share, the more the competitive benefits are pronounced.
Okay, great. And the Competition Bureau has also suggested that the CRTC should adopt a temporary MVNO policy to incentivize and accelerate facilities-based competition from disruptors. Is that not true? And could you maybe, Ms. Pratt, speak to why that's so important to enhance competition?
Well, I can speak generally. Ms. Sonley can probably speak much more detailed to what our submissions were to the CRTC. But, we do have a relatively stable oligopolistic market structure in Canada in the telecommunications sector. And our observations are where you have that fourth player that is able to come in and disrupt the existing players, it disrupts the oligopolistic market structure. It disrupts the coordination to the extent that we do see prices come down and quality go up.
My understanding is that this is applying an MVNO policy to a facilities-based disruptor, which would be a temporary measure to increase competition, knowing full well that MVNOs are not going to disrupt the market to the degree that a facilities-based one would. So, Ms. Sonley, can you speak to why that particular strategy is important? And then I want to check with Mr. Hutton whether they're moving forward on that.
Yeah, the idea is that it's quite costly to build a wireless network, and so this provides the facilities-based competitor with an existing customer base that they can use to fund the network build. So it would allow them to expand to additional regions in Canada.
What is your perspective on that, Mr. Hutton? Is the CRTC moving forward with the recommendations from the Competition Bureau?
We have certainly moved forward on our MVNO regime, which was greatly inspired by the submissions of the Competition Bureau on that front. As I was discussing with some of your colleagues, we have set that regime in place. We are actively working to make sure that deals are being made and that competitors are entering the market to provide high quality, reliable, and affordable telecommunication services.
Thanks. And maybe a last question to you, Mr. Hutton. What is the CRTC doing in relation to canceling or reducing junk fees and or the international roaming charges that we know are kind of costly?
We are, as you mentioned in your earlier question, information for consumers, non-price activities such as imposing caps, reducing fees for being able to transfer, everything from putting in place a regime so that you can unlock your phone and benefit that much quicker from competition. You can unlock your phone when you do want to roam. Those are all items that we put in place that help greatly on that front. We are currently studying, I mentioned earlier, looking at the costing with respect to internal roaming fees. We are currently studying international roaming fees to be able to truly understand why Canadians are paying more on that front.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Viss, I see you've got the proper headset just in time, so the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. Just specifically on roaming fees, Mr. Hutton, can you give us a timeline when roaming fees will be reduced?
We have a current proceeding with respect to the internal roaming fees where we are looking at that costing, so we're actively working on that front there. We are at the beginning of studying the international roaming fees, so that one would certainly be a little bit further away, but we are certainly looking at getting behind why those rates are higher, what are the international arrangements.
But just for my constituents, because we hear a lot, all of us hear a lot about, man, I'm getting hosed on my cell phone bill. And a lot of people where I live go to the United States on a regular basis. When can we expect a decision from CRTC to reduce roaming costs?
I cannot forecast that exact date at this point in time. We are certainly looking at...
Well, given the costs that people are faced with every day, can you please get back to our committee when you talk to your advisors so we can have a specific date? Thank you.
Thank you.
The other issue I'd like to speak today relates to connection fees. Just recently, I was an existing TELUS customer, and I went to purchase a new phone. I'd had the same phone for like 5 years, and I get my bill, and on my bill is this connection fee for $60. And I'm like, what a load of crock. I'm paying a premium for my bill. It's just like an added tax. what position does the CRTC have on connection fees? Do you think a $60 charge for buying a new phone is an appropriate, basically tax on Canadians for this essential service?
The CRTC certainly, through all of our approaches, is looking to introduce additional competition so we can make sure that Canadians not only get high-quality service, reliable.
We know you're looking for additional competition, but on connection fees, do you think this is acceptable?
What we've done with respect to connection fees is to reduce the period for which you are caught by your contract. We have made sure that when you are quitting your contract, that you do not have additional fees. We've made sure.
No, but I think you don't understand. So when you go with, if I'm an existing Rogers or Bell or TELUS customer, I go to buy a new phone, and just to connect that phone, they charge me $60. Is that acceptable?
What's acceptable is if they did not tell you that when they were to subscribe. We do not regulate the end user rates at this point in time of cellular services. What they are required to do is to explain to you in plain fashion what those charges are. And if they have not done that, there is an opportunity to reach out to the CCTS, which is the Ombudsman for Services, and receive compensation through that route.
What would be the CRTC's position on this? Like, you're an existing customer of one of the oligopolistic companies, and you purchase a new phone through that company, and you're given a $60 bill. What would CRTC's position be on that? Is that a good practice or a bad practice?
We can't intervene at this point in time on those particular those particular practices. What we want them to do is certainly inform you so that you can make informed choices with respect to cellular prices. We are actively working on implementing the MVNO regime so that there is more competition, so that practices that may seem uneasy for consumers that are eliminated through competition.
Thank you. Ms. Pratt, at the beginning of the conversation in your opening testimony, you referred to the impact of British Columbians losing Shaw when you outline that the Shaw-Rogers merger that you opposed was not going to be good for British Columbians. I happen to represent a riding in British Columbia where Shaw has a major market presence. What impact do you believe the Rogers-Shaw merger had on consumers where Shaw had a major market presence?
So we did think it was going to have a detrimental impact on the prices that consumers pay in British Columbia. That was part of our case. There was a range of price effects that we put forward, and the offerings from Shaw, and in particular Shaw Mobile, and what we were seeing happen in the market as Shaw Mobile was launched and brought in is something that we were particularly concerned about because they were bringing prices down, offering bundles and gaining market share.
Thank you for that. So is it, just to clarify, is it my understanding that because of the Rogers-Shaw merger, prices actually went up in areas where Shaw had a major market concentration?
So I wish I could be more helpful. I don't have a definitive answer to that because we based our case on the data that was before us pre-merger and during the period of investigation. I do not have an update as to what the price effects significantly have been in any particular market in British Columbia, I'm afraid.
But I can conclude from your remarks that lower prices, the option for a lower price plan offered through Shaw was lost to consumers in British Columbia as a result of the merger.
What I can say is that we have no information to say that Rogers is continuing to offer those same promotions that were available under Shaw.
Ms. Pratt, you're a very good lawyer. Okay, thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Vice. Monsieur Van.
Thank you, Mr. Vice. Mr. Van Bynek.
Internet access has been an issue for my community for a number of years. I was the mayor in Newmarket for 12 years, and the business community's concern was that there wasn't the subscriber density that would justify Rogers or Bell upgrading their infrastructure, so effectively they were sweating the copper. So as a result of that, our municipality established an ISP, and the regional municipality established an infrastructure and our regional municipality established a broadband backbone infrastructure, which increased the competition. It comes back to the issue of we look at roads, water, wastewater being a utility. When are we going to start to consider that broadband actually is a utility? And to what extent has the CRTC provided funding to municipalities so that they could fund municipal service corporations, effectively take the profit motive out and consider that as a utility? And I'll address that first to the CRTC, and I'd like to get the perspective from the Competition Bureau as well.
Well, we have our broadband fund that we've been working with for a number of years, and that we're currently looking again at the policy to make sure it goes, it's easier to apply, that we respond faster, and that we do look at the remaining areas where access still needs to be completed to achieve the objective of 100%. With respect to actual municipalities participating, I can maybe ask Mr. Bagley to help with the criteria on that front.
Go ahead.
Yeah, certainly. So the existing criteria is municipalities can be applicants, but they have to be partnered with, as part of a consortium with somebody, an organization that can act as a telecommunications service provider, so that we can in turn regulate the service that they're going to put in place.
So how much of the funding that you've collected so far has actually gone to municipalities?
Rather, I'd have to get back to you on that, but it's certainly regional governments have been recipients of our fund. But I could get back to you with exactly how might have gone to specific municipalities.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing how the CRTC ensures that the funding is distributed and is complementary to existing government initiatives so that we avoid duplication. So I'd be interested in receiving that data.
No, that's been a very big part of our fund to date, and the part of the reason that we have to be so careful in the funding that we've awarded to date is to ensure that we're not overstepping and overlapping. So we work closely with both ISED and our territorial and provincial counterparts, have done to date, and will continue to do so to make sure we're dispensing funds in an efficient manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ms. Pratt, would that be considered a disruptor? Would that create an increase in competition?
I'll defer to Ms. Sonley if we've had any sort of public positions on this. I mean, in looking at merger transactions or looking at the conduct of existing competitors, that's our bread and butter. And so the facts on the ground in a particular area that are relevant to the review of any merger transaction, we take those as they come. So if there are investments that are being made, for example, that may inform our view of where the market is headed in order to examine the impact of a particular merger transaction.
What this would do is, if you created that utility, it would be simply the last mile that everybody could rent at the same price. Would that increase the competitive environment? An example is Telemax, I believe, is taking the last mile off of the fiber optic backbone. And any other competitor could ride that fiber optic backbone at the same price as others. Does that not create a more competitive environment?
It could. I think in general, we tend to favor market forces wherever possible, given the difficulties of price regulation. It can be really challenging to keep up, especially in markets like this with changing prices. And so in general, we do tend to favor market forces. If it was found that was not a viable option, then that would be something we would consider.
Now, my concern would be that as we press the major infrastructure holders to reduce their pricing towards third-party providers, that the return on equity wouldn't be there, and there would be some pressure not to keep the infrastructure up to date and effective. Now, what kind of measures should we consider to avoid something like that happening?
That is, in fact, the subject of the hearing we held that terminated last Friday, in which our colleagues from the Competition Bureau appeared in front of us. We have to ensure that we create a regime where service is reliable. There, questions of outages are minimized, that service is affordable, that we are not the most expensive country in the world, all while being able to, build out and invest in those markets there. The model we have chosen is the one where we're trying to trust competition, introducing competition, and having those competitors customers use the networks that are in place. But any new investment by any player in facilities is welcomed and, would be beneficial to competition.
Okay. Thank you very much, MP Van Buynen. I'm afraid I have to cut you off because we're running out of time. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous pour 2 minutes 30.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I want to kind of set the table for our next meeting. We're going to meet with the telecom leaders, and of course, they're going to talk about their towers, their infrastructure, and that all costs a great deal. The operating cost, though, is low. And these are conditions that lead to a natural monopoly or oligopoly. And, of course, when roaming becomes very important in that case, but if we lowered roaming costs, then it would be a disaster for them. That's what their opinion. So I would like to ask the Competition Bureau, just a short answer, please. Is there the option of reducing roaming fees significantly and maintaining investment?
Given the technical nature of the question, I think in our 2019 study that was referenced earlier, we did find that roaming rates greatly exceeded at that time the retail rates in the market. And we suggested that there be a check and balance, that you look at what the retail prices are after you've completed a cost study, to just as a common sense check on whether the cost study reflects market realities. So I think, if you look now, the price per gigabyte has declined. So I think we would encourage that still in 2024.
Donc, je comprends que vous êtes d'avis qu'il y a moyen.
So if I understand correctly, you feel that those roaming costs could be lowered even while investment is maintained. Thank you. That's the answer I was hoping for. Quebecor has said there are the roaming costs that could be, or prices that could be reduced through negotiation, but the major telecoms are putting obstacles up. What is there in current regulations that prevents goodwill negotiations so that we can naturally get these roaming prices down?
Study, we did conclude that there was market power at both the retail level and the wholesale level, and so I think that would make it challenging to negotiate on market terms an agreement that was competitive.
Donc, des comportements de monopole.
So we're talking about monopolistic behavior.
That's correct.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Garon. And last but not least, we have Mr. Massé, and I believe you have a motion to table, so I'll recognize you, Mr. Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for their testimony today. I'm going to read into the record a motion that members have been distributed electronically, and it relates to the work of this committee where we have requested the CEOs to appear, and Mr. Palado did follow through on that. And that's why I think this motion is in order, because we have been given notice that there are other individuals that are being submitted to attend our hearings on Wednesday. And unless there's, I guess, organizational restructure, they will not be the CEOs on Wednesday that appear. So hopefully this will put on notice and we'll see some cooperation with this, and it won't be necessary. However, I do want to table this to show at least the New Democrats are sincerely concerned with not following through what the committee has decided. And the motion is as read, is that that in the relation to the study of accessibility and affordability of wireless and broadband services in Canada, the committee invite, and if this invitation is not accepted, summons persistent to Standing Order 108.1, the following to appear before the committee to answer questions and explain measures that are being taken. Tony Staffario, President and CEO of Rogers Communications, Inc., Mirko Bibic, President and CEO of BC Inc., and Darren Entwistle, President and CEO of TELUS Communications, Inc. And I thank members and the chair for allowing me to table this motion today.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. So if I understand correctly, you're tabling the motion, not moving it just right now. We'll give the opportunity to the individuals mentioned in your motion to take heed of what was discussed at the committee today, and then perhaps on Wednesday, if they're not present, we can summon the witnesses to come to committee. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I recognize Mr. Perkins.
Just a technical question. I don't know why we would wait till to Wednesday. That means then we're going to, I guess, question those folks and then do another meeting to question their CEOs. Is that what we would do?
Yeah, Mr. Perkins, that's what is suggested, and I'll just tell you why. I think it's good practice to summon witnesses once they've actually not showed up instead of before. So this is giving a bit of notice to the individuals in the motion that they should be there on Wednesday. Provided they're not there, then we can summon the witnesses to it.
But I think they already have sort of indicated that by who they've put forward.
They have indeed, and they've got the text of the motion, the initial motion, which clearly mentions them, but they have until Wednesday to change their mind and appear before the committee. So I think it's a reasonable course of action. We'll question the witnesses that they send on Wednesday, and should they not be there, then summon them for a later meeting. Mr. Gao.
I just have a technical question. In the original motion, we called for the CEOs to appear. I don't have the motion here. What was the deadline that we had for them to respond? I don't have it here either, but I don't think there was a deadline. And I'm having that confirmed for me by the clerk and our analysts. So if everyone agrees and there are no other comments, I will thank our witnesses. Mr. Garon, I think February 15th was mentioned in the original motion. That's possible. That's not what I have right here in the invitation that we sent out. So the motion as adopted didn't have a deadline.
This is for joining us on this Monday morning. Your testimony is much appreciated, and we will suspend and come back in camera for committee business. Thank you very much. Meeting suspended.